I also know that you've done counselling and psychotherapy. And some of our viewers might be wondering, what does a psychotherapist do? Are you a shrink? Are you, and then what does it take for somebody to go into a career like psychotherapy?
And it's a really important question. The only thing I would say is that what that profession does is allow, through really high quality methodology, enable people to talk. So the whole thing about it's good to talk, and it's good to be listened to, and it's good to have approaches whereby people, in hearing what is being said, are able to support you to support yourself. And the outcome of that is counselling, changing lives. Psychotherapy changes lives and saves lives. It's good to talk.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host, and our guest this week is in the person of Mr. David Weaver. Right, so David is a leadership coach. He's also in the past been a social worker. He's been an activist. He's been involved in the founding of something called Operation Black Vote, and he's done a whole host of things. He works with people in politics. He works with people in the public sector and private sector, and he's a first generation immigrant from the Caribbean.
Yeah, my parents came over from Antigua in the Caribbean, so they were the Windrush generation. So
okay.
I'm the product of that.
Anyway, but David, welcome to Against All Odds.
Yeah, honoured to be here, Daniel.
Great. So David, just tell us a little bit about your background, just to give us a bit of context, because I know your dad was a social worker as well.
Yeah.
Like you just said, came over in Windrush generation. What was it like growing up in up north in those days?
Yeah.
And were there any experiences that perhaps shaped you for later on in your life?
Yeah.
Before this episode starts, I'd like to ask a big favour. Your subscription means a lot to us, because the bigger this platform gets, the bigger the guests get. So do me a favour, please click on the subscribe button and the bell notification so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get back to this episode.
Well, I grew up, so I was born in 1964, believe it or not.
You don't look it.
And so late 60s, the 70s and in the 80s, growing up as a young boy to a young man, I was always conscious of inequality, always conscious of it. Not least because my father, who was a church minister at the time, largest black-led church in Nottingham, and this was through the 70s and the 80s, was always very pronounced about anti-racism inequalities as part of the teachings of Christ. That's what he would say, and that's what was happening. And he was also, alongside my mother as well, it was about the faith, but that inequalities was not incompatible with the faith. Mm-hmm. So I was always conscious of that, just in terms of my teachings from my parents, but also the experiences that I had at school, runnings with the police, the criminal justice system as a young man growing up, and as someone who just knew that, and this was something that my mother and father always used to say, that you're not superior to anybody, but you're sure as hell not inferior to anybody either. Mm-hmm. So the intersection of experiencing racism, but at the same time thinking, this is not me, we're better than this, I think shaped my life. So I put a lot down to my parents, I put a lot down to my family, and I put a lot down to, I don't know what it is, but just having this feeling that you have to tackle injustice and we can do better than this. And that, and then growing up at that time, being interested in sports and so forth, and my hero was Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, And then I learned about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. It just made me feel proud, you know. And it was also through the time where I think it was the late 70s, early 80s, where Roots came on, the program Roots. And I went to, at that time, a predominantly white school, and I learned to fight. And part of the fighting was watching Roots and thinking, you ain't going to do that in this time. You're not going to do that in this time. So I think it was an underlying feeling of, I'm here, I have a right to be here, and tackling all this nonsense that was going on. And I just thank God for my parents. I'm very fortunate, I've been very blessed, but also seeing and hearing about what they dealt with. No Irish, no dogs, no blacks, you know, and learning about what happened in Notting Hill and in Nottingham in 1958, where black people fought back against skinheads and racists and fascists. There's always this thing about my mother. 2 years ago, she died, and it was her birthday just a couple of days ago. So I'm very always thinking about that, which she taught me. So she taught me two things. If anybody hit you, you hit them back. That was a Windrush thing. But then she also said to me, a man that fights and runs away will live to fight another day. So if you bring those two things together, it's pretty powerful. You fight back, but actually be strategic about it as well. So that was a bit of the underpinnings as to why I am who I am, and my journey.
Okay, so why social work? Because I know you, I know your dad was a social worker, and was this something that you wanted to do, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, what was the story behind that?
Well, I think, I think it was my father's influence. You go into social work, but also when I was younger, hated the cold. I didn't want to work outside. A really good family friend was a car mechanic, and my dad used to go make me work with him. I want an inside job. So, but I think it's that passion around supporting and helping people. So I went to social work. I was there nearly 3 years. I loved the philosophy of social work, but I just didn't like working in the profession. And I found that there were lots of well-meaning type white people who wanted to talk for me. I was okay as long as I was agreeing with them. At the point that I didn't agree with them, there was an issue, and I just didn't I just felt that it was a good grounding, and I still got a passion for social work, because social work is very, very important. A lot of our people have gone into social work, and rightfully so, but I felt that I needed to do more than that. And so that's when I moved to London in the mid to late 80s, mid 80s actually, and two things happened really funny actually. I think there was all this whole piece of growing up in the north, and I had a girlfriend actually. She lived in London. I partly wanted to move down there because of that, but also it was at a time where you had the GLC, the Great London Council, which was very, very political, and there was lots going on in London around anti-racism and the voluntary sector, lots of activity, and I just wanted to be part of that. And I remember being in Nottingham, my social work job, and after work I'd usually be in the market square, the city of the centre part of the town centre. I'd get there about 6 o'clock, and there was this big clock, and it would chime at 6 o'clock. And usually I'd be standing at the bus stop thinking, contemplating my future, and there'd be this guy that always walked by at 6 o'clock. And I said to myself, if I go into the city centre and it's 6 o'clock and that clock chimes and that man's there, I'm leaving, I'm going to London. And it happened. So I kid you not, that's what happened. And then that's when I moved. I moved to London. So yeah, social work background, but there was the sense of politics drove me to move down to London at that time, and I got a job working in the voluntary sector. I was an employment development worker for a large policy-making body doing work around single homelessness and equality within that. Had a series of jobs, and I moved into local government, and then I, at a very young age, became director of policy, London Borough of Tower Hamlets at the time, when they were planning the Docklands development and building the Canary Wharf. So you had absolute wealth right next to absolute poverty. So that was my entry into London, and I think that foray between wanting to do something professionally and rising, but at the same time the human rights and anti-racism piece being part of it.
Okay. Oh, that's amazing, David. So moving into, I also know that you've done counselling and psychotherapy. You are actually the past president, I think it was, of the British Association of Psychotherapists.
So it's the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy.
Okay. And some of our viewers might be wondering, what does a psychotherapist do? I mean, are you a shrink? Are you, and then what does it take for somebody to go into a career like psychotherapy?
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a distraction, but then I think it's important for...
Yeah, and it's a really important question. And there's always big debates within the counselling and psychotherapy profession about what is counselling and what is psychotherapy. I'm not going to go into that. The only thing I would say is that what that profession does is allow, through really high quality methodology, enable people to talk. So the whole thing about it's good to talk, and it's good to be listened to, and it's good to have approaches whereby people, in hearing what is being said, are able to support you to support yourself. And the outcome of that is counselling, changing lives. Psychotherapy changes lives and saves lives. It's good to talk. So if you're talking about issues around depression, anxiety, we know that with COVID-19, when that struck, that the mental health of the country decreased. Actually, the mental health of Black and Asian minority ethnic people significantly dropped, and trauma is an aspect of that. And so, our community suffered more from deaths than the mainstream communities. That's a fact. That when those people that continued to work, which were seen as the professions that were the emergency professions, it was our people that took the licks. They're the ones that died. I remember at that time where, our tradition is to be going to funerals and lots of people at funerals and so forth, and there could only be 10 people at funerals and so forth. Yeah. That caused all kinds of issues. Who should turn up? Why? You know what it's like anyway. And the mental health impacts were disproportionate, and trauma kicks in downstream. So that whole piece around counselling and psychotherapy and therapeutic interventions being culturally appropriate, because a lot of our people have gone to counsellors and psychotherapists and think, what the hell's what are they even talking about? You know what I mean? They just sort of ask you a question, they're looking at you and you think, freak you out and stuff. So what I felt was important was that we raise the importance of counselling and psychotherapy, but it being culturally appropriate for our people.
Okay.
So in a sense, that's a very long-winded but hopefully an understandable insight into what counselling and psychotherapy is, and the importance of that, and the increasing importance of that for our communities. And so one of the things that was important to me when I was president for 6 years, and I was the vice president before that and on the board before that, was making counselling and psychotherapy more relevant to ordinary people, because and to get more people of colour into the profession as practitioners, and that the training would be fit for purpose for that as well.
So, what qualifications do you need to go into counselling and psychotherapy?
Well, I'm going to give you. I'll give you a website and go to that, because it's not as straightforward as that.
Okay.
bacp.co.uk. But anybody that feels that they would like to be a counsellor and psychotherapist, and I think a lot of our people in our communities actually play that role anyway. There's the aunt in the family you go and speak to on the estate. You go and speak to this brother there because they've got those skills. Or even in the barbers. Okay. You go into the barbers and you find that there's a lot of our people, our barbers and our hairdressers, are listening to people on a Saturday morning talking and giving them support and advice and space to talk. a lot of it happens there. So what we're trying to do is to formalise that and bring them into the profession. bacp.co.uk and have a look at that. And I'm happy to speak to people at any point after. But you don't have to have any big qualifications to be part of that.
Okay. So it sounds as if, I mean, your track record, obviously from social work into counselling and psychotherapy into leadership in local government and all that, basically meant that you had to bring certain skills to bear. I mean, like, I would presume that you'd have to have very good listening skills and stuff like that. And you've got to be very empathetic and stuff like that. I mean, what can you tell our viewers, somebody watching this, about some of the positive attributes of those soft skills?
A lot of our people have been told that you always have to have qualifications for everything you do, and it's good to be qualified. It's good to seek good education and so forth. But the research shows that in almost every sphere of professional life, the more qualified you become as black people, the more you're likely to be discriminated against. So you do not get the jobs commensurate with your qualification. So that's not to say you shouldn't pursue education, because it's very important to do so where you can. But I think it's important to tell people, to encourage people, and other guests have said this, I know, on your programme, that relational skills are important. Just that ability to listen, the ability to build relationships, build trust, master your brief. So whatever you're doing, master your brief, because two truths can exist. You can be black and discriminated against, but you can also be black and crap what you do. So it's important. It's really but it's true. I've been in situations where our firm do investigations, and someone has said that I'm being treated in a racist manner, and the organisation says they're not competent, and both are right. What we know is we always have to be better than, and work three times as hard and so forth, and that should not have to be the case. But let's deal with the world as it is, not that it should be. And so you have to do all of that, but master your brief. Just get us, know your business more than anybody else, and that means hard work. But I think relational skills, understanding who the people are that you need to be networking with, but also just be clear about your purpose. What is it that you're trying to achieve? I call it a noble cause. What's your noble cause? So if you're clear about that, and we learned that from, I know you had a guest, Lee Jasper, some time ago, and we were the first people to invite Nelson Mandela into the country when he was released, not the formal civic trip, but the one before, and that's what we really learned from that. I wanted to drop that in.
Why not?
I thought, is he going to ask the question just in case? We met him and got pictures to prove, but that's all vanity. I mean, the point was that learning from someone like him in prison for all those years, and what drove him. Every time he was asked the question about what drove him, it was that sense of purpose. This is my noble cause. This is what's important. And if you have clarity about that, then you know what's important in terms of building relationships, listening, being clear about what's important for you, how you lead through others, because you can't do it yourself. Moving from I as a leader to we as leaders, because sometimes we can be quite siloed. It's about being collaborative and working with others. So those are the things I think are really important, and there'll be others as well.
Okay, right. So one of the things as well that I know you've been instrumental in doing is the founding of Operation Black Vote, which I'd never heard about, until we started talking ahead of the shoot. And I'd like you to tell us, number one, a bit about Operation Black Vote, and secondly, to convince people like myself, who, I'm educated, whatever it is, but I've never voted before, because my thinking was, is it going to matter? But it's wrong. It's wrong. After talking to you, I realized that I need to be responsible and vote. And we've got an election coming up this year. There are new rules to the voter registration. You need ID and all that. People don't know that.
Yeah.
So how can we as a community increase awareness about the importance of voting? Yeah. And also, like I said, if you can just tell us a bit about Operation Black Vote, which I know is very close to your heart.
Yeah. So Operation Black Vote, I was one of the co-founders of with others. And that came out of a lot of activism work that we've been doing over the preceding 10, 15 years. Operation Black Vote came into being in 1996. And what that was, for me and for others, saying was, we can have all of these campaigns and arguments about our human rights. And the evidence would be very clear. So every aspect of our economic and social life here, housing, homelessness, policing, deaths in custody, maternity deaths, yada, 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 yada. We fear worse, we're disproportionately impacted, and we can win the argument, but politicians weren't listening. And we knew that we weren't voting in the numbers that we should. We weren't even registering to vote, and it's still a big issue now. And we also knew that in various parts of this country, the black vote could make a difference if we're strategic. Mm-hmm. And that is very important as well for us to be more organised in how we have conversations about the plight in this country. So it was happening disparately. Some churches did it well, some didn't do it that well, and some communities did it well, and so forth. So Operation Black Vote came out of that. It was actually, we can only change things if politicians listen to us. Mm-hmm. They'll only listen to us if they know we are either registered to vote and we will vote. Mm-hmm. And that we have the intelligence to say our vote can make the difference because we hold the balance of power. So that's how it came about. And there was a lot of traction around that from politicians who knew that actually if these people are serious about getting something set up and they knew we were serious, then they'd have to come on board with that. So that was the reason why it was set up. Why vote? It's important. I work with political leaders as part of the work that I do, council leaders and so forth. And you can have a conversation with them. What matters to them is that they have the power vested in them through the vote. And I know they will only listen to you if they feel that you're going to vote or at least register to vote. Mm. So Operation Black Vote was really about political education, so political literacy, understanding how the system works, pulling forward manifestos which show actually these are some of the issues that we should be really focusing on, and asking people to look at that from their own perspective in terms of them, their families, their friends, their loved ones, and their communities. And we found that by doing that and working with communities at a grassroots level, people are getting more involved. And I would say this now, that, society at large is just fed up with politicians. If you watch Question Time. The other day I was in a pub. I was working somewhere and I went into the pub and there was largely white people. And Question Time was on and Fiona Bruce was asking questions. And every time she asked a question, politicians blabbing on them because, you answer the question. Yeah, you know what I mean? So society at large is. So imagine our communities. So when you say to me that, you don't vote or register to vote and others, I can understand where that's coming from. But also understand that our people died for the vote. Our ancestors died for that right to be involved in the democratic system. There's that. Secondly, that why should you be listened to if you're not registered to vote? Mm-hmm. And if it is that, and I'd say this, if it is that you don't know whether to vote for any of the established parties, at least if you're registered to vote, they will listen. Mm. They will listen, they have to listen. But we can be strategic about our votes as well. Mm. And with Operation Black Vote in past elections have demonstrated where the black vote has made a difference. Mm. Because we've been engaging with people throughout the year, not just at election time, throughout the year as well. So it's really, really important, that whole piece about registering to vote and voting, standing as independents. There's much more over the last few years, elections as well. The independent movement has grown, so people standing as individuals, black people too, and being elected onto councils or as independent alliance of parties that are outside the mainstream. So that's something that more and more people are looking at. But the vote is so important. I would say two things. One is the vote, and the other thing is using the legal system to ensure that our human rights as black people are not violated.
Okay. Well, one thing that I'm not sure you touched upon is, because I know you've been involved in like leadership training of black people, and there's some people in Parliament now who are products of your leadership training. Can you just tell us a bit about that? Because I think it's important that people know that's an area of impact as well, that you're trying to make change.
Yeah. So we've had, and we have what we call civil leadership programs, and leadership programs for people that want to go into senior roles in institutions, leadership programs based on an MP shadowing scheme, people that are interested in becoming parliamentarians, members of parliament, school governors, members of boards, so NHS boards and so forth, and people that just want to get more involved in leadership activity within their communities. Okay. And we've had a lot of success. So in terms of members of parliament, I think when we first started, there were just 4 black MPs who were people of colour. Bernie Grant, Paul Boateng, Keith Vaz, and one other, Dan Abbott. I forget Dan Abbott. And there are others who have progressed through the ranks because they've been on, and I would say so because they've been on the MP shadowing scheme and the leadership programme, and the others who've become governors and on boards and so forth. So that's a very, very important part, and we've had success as a result of that. We just a couple of weeks ago launched a scheme in Westminster, for Westminster City Council, targeting black people that live in Westminster. We've done it in other areas such as Croydon, and we're going to be doing one in Ealing, so Birmingham, so up and down the country. So that's been really successful, and we'll continue that. The important thing that we realise now is, as well as addressing the black democratic deficit, the lack of black people in those institutions, we need to also have black people in those institutions that are committed to certain values. Our skin folk aren't necessarily our kinfolk. And we know, and I'm not going to go into detail, that if you look in Parliament right now, there are people who, black and brown, so-called, who are probably getting away with things that white MPs couldn't get away with. You know, so it's really, really important to be getting the right values, not necessarily identifying which political party it should be or shouldn't be, but leaders that have the values that will address the issues that are pertinent to black communities in this country right now.
Yeah. So what is the typical? Because I know you also do a lot of work in the private sector, not just in politics. So you work with wide range of banks and other organisations. I mean, what exactly does DWC do for? I mean, for somebody watching this, you know, who's in a position of leadership or whatever it is, what would they stand to get by engaging DWC?
Right. Okay.
You know, just.
Okay. So we do. We're interested in leadership within. Political leadership within organisations and individuals who want to, through their own personal leadership, achieve excellence. So that's in a nutshell what it is. Leadership is a lonely place, so people can give it large often, but when you get close to leaders, whatever their ranks, whatever you perceive of them, then there's something about the best leaders are authentic. If we're talking about black leaders and women leaders, they're challenges because you're in an institution that is institutionally racist, institutionally sexist, and that black women have particular issues within that system as well. So there's something about holding a mirror up to yourself as leaders. What are you about? What's your purpose? What is it you're seeking to achieve? And supporting them in that regard. Working with political leaders around, you know, what are their ambitions as political leaders. And like I said to you earlier, when we spoke about this before coming on screen, making them realise that issues around anti-racism and equality, equity and human rights are absolutely essential to leadership in this country right now. Private sector, funny enough, get it. They can see, many of them see actually, you know, even if they're being mercenary, they think actually it makes good business sense. Why would we want to exclude this part of our community, which is growing? If you look at the numbers for any white racist, it's frightening. You know what's going to be happening in terms of the birth rate and the statistics and so forth. So it makes sense. But a lot of the private businesses also realise that actually it's the right thing to do in terms of social impact and the rights and the human rights of their customers, and that can address effectively and positively bottom line as well. So without the fish rots from the head, you know, the people perish without good leadership.
Yeah.
Someone said that in Bob Marley, but he said it differently. So that's the work that we do. It's about working with people and organisations and the institutions and the political system to realise their leadership and their leadership potential.
Okay. So you work with both individuals and public bodies. Okay. Moving back to some events, which, you know, again, we spoke before the shoot, and you refer to them as seminal events. Yeah. Okay. And it looks like, you know, we've got a few that come to mind: George Floyd, Stephen Lawrence, and Roland Adams.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, it almost takes somebody to lose their life, you know, in some horrific way for society to kind of wake up to the injustices that exist, you know, as people of color. And I mean, what lessons do you think have been learned from these seminal moments? Because the world in which we live now is, you know, you've got other issues, pressing issues, cost of living crisis, you've got the war in Ukraine, you've got the war in Israel and Palestine. You know, do people really care about improving representation of people of color at the senior levels? You know, or is it is it just something that people did in the moment, or in these seminal moments, which has kind of just died down?
Yeah. Because George Floyd's death should not be in vain. And you saw what happened with George Floyd. Everyone's getting up and saying the right things. And so even the unusual suspects, because you saw it on your screens. But what about Stephen Lawrence? Roland Adams, whose mother Audrey was buried just 2 days ago. And she, you know, big shout out for her because of her contribution as well, and her family. And I always say that you have these seminal moments, but the further you move away from those seminal moments, is the more likely is that society reverts to type. So we can't just rely on people dying for our liberty, because we know what happens. You move away from it, people revert to type. You can't say nothing about black rights at the moment. I think there's one company, I think what they called just a couple of days ago, have said that if they, is it something food? I can't remember, Northern Food? I can't remember the name of the company, but they've said that if people go on a training course, they get a discount. A training course to do with race equality, they get a discount. And as a result of saying that, the kind of backlash that was coming from mainstream press and mainstream figures to say, oh, we've all gone woke. They weren't saying all that stuff when George Floyd died. So I think there's something about not relying on that. It's about our communities understanding and beginning to fight for our rights and organising and showing that our vote can make a difference, and standing up when there's injustice, and doing the things that we need to do. So there's something about doing for self, because we can't rely on the system to change it. We have to do for self. So that's a big concern that we have, that we're just waiting for these seminal moments, and we know what's going to happen when those seminal moments die down.
So thanks a lot, Councillor, for clarifying that. But what can we also say, because a lot of times these black and white or white on black incidences are kind of blown out of proportion. But then relative to people who are suffering social deprivation, you know, young kids all over London, you know, who are carrying knives and sort of gangs and stabbings and all that, those are far more than the racial crimes. You know, if we'll be honest to ourselves, but it doesn't get that much coverage. I mean, these days it's pretty much normal to have a kid stabbed on their way from school or to or from school. It's just like, it's a thing that happens, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost become normalized. It's less of a shocking. It's like, okay, fine, it'll be in the news for a day or two, and then that's it.
Yeah.
You know. But what can we as a people do to improve the plight of our community and give younger people, you know, something to aspire to? That they don't have to.
Well, you see, programs like this are important because if you just look at the press, BBC and Sky and the rest of it, the impression you get of our people is just that. It's we're stabbing each other, that, you know, fathers aren't looking after their kids, that, you know, stereotype after stereotype, and within that some elements of truth. So there's something about what it takes a village to raise a child, isn't it? It takes a village to raise a child, an African proverb and a Caribbean proverb, which is really important. Which is the point I was making about we fight the state to resource youth centres and so forth, but actually we've got to be doing things ourselves. So what's the black church doing? So we were meeting with black churches just a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying that they need to step up. They realise they need to step up. What are we doing as members of family in terms of supporting others? What are we doing in terms of role modelling even to some of those young boys as they're growing up, that actually that kind of lifestyle is not good enough? Because actually when you speak to a lot of these boys, and I've done work with a lot of young boys to young men and others I've worked with who are either involved in or at risk of serious youth violence, sometimes you're talking to scared little boys. They've got mental health issues, they've got psychological issues, they haven't got fathers around. So initiatives like Father to Father, where this is a particular program which is run in East London, where work is being done with fathers, black fathers, to talk about their responsibility as fathers, even if they're broken up from their partners. What are their responsibilities for? But what are their responsibilities? Work with young boys and young girls who are actually going through crisis as well, and actually funding those initiatives ourselves. We found that they make a difference. They do make a difference. And that we stop normalising that these things are going on, but also doing what you're doing, highlighting where there have been successes, because those successes also inspire people as well. So there's something around tackling the state, tackling what's happening within policing, because I tell you something, some of these crimes that we talk about that are happening in Peckham or in Nottingham, in Manchester and so forth, if it was white on white, they'd be resolved. You know, they'd be finalised, there'd be a conclusion to it. So we've got to fight that. We've also got to start looking at what can we do for self. And it is happening. And when it's happening, programmes like yours should, and I'm sure will, publicise that, because then that becomes an inspiration and an aspiration for other families and other communities to do the same. You know, we've got to start from a basis that says, you know, we're not biologically predisposed to be like this. You know, it is a social circumstance, a political circumstance which has made this happen, but we can make a difference if we're getting involved to sort it out.
Okay, so David, you're a social worker background, leadership consultant, and all that. And I mean, how do the optics look? Okay, let's be very honest here. How do the optics look? And I'll give you a case in hand. You know, this couple, university students in Nottingham, walking home from a night out, and they get attacked by a black, mentally deranged person. But guess what? Everywhere on the news, they put the guy's face, it's a black face. What message does that send? The optics don't look good.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk till the cows come home, but things like that, I mean, it almost looks as if the system, the social services system, and whatever, and the policing system, whatever it is, failed those families.
Yes.
Because that guy should never have been left to roam the streets. Because it wasn't like he was known.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the statistics show that in terms of black people's, particularly black men's, access to mental health or contact with mental health, you're more likely to be killed, restrained, or detained by the mental health system. We're not being supported by the mental health system. You know, where support is needed for young men, you're more likely to be seen as big, oversized, and deranged. So the mental health system is letting us down. Killed, restrained, or detained. Just mull on that for a while, you know? Killed, restrained, or detained. So people like him are not getting the support that's required. At the same time, that does not take away the pain for those families. Doesn't take that away. But when the system racializes us so that you're getting that picture, to get over and above the pictures that you get, you know, of, for example, the police officer that has now been named for the allegation of murder of Chris Carber. You don't want to see his picture all of the time. You know what I mean? We saw the picture before. So we've got to tackle the system that racializes us. We've also got to tackle the system that does not give us the support at the time of need. And the mental health system has been found wanting for years, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing as well, in trying to ensure that you have an anti-racist mental health system that recognises that racism causes madness. You know, people become mentally ill because of racism, and I dare say that's an element of, without taking away the pain for the families of what's happening here, but also the racialisation of the particular issue by the press in the way that they do it.
Okay. As we bring this conversation to a close, I mean, what inspires you? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
We've got to make the society we found better than the society that we leave behind. You know. So that makes So we bequeath to the next generation a better society than we found it. So that motivates me. You know, I have a son, and I look at him. You know, I have nieces and nephews and other people as part of the village, where I think, come on, you know, we've got to do better. You look at the Windrush generation, and you see their suffering and their pains. They did better, and the way they're being treated now on the way out, it's disrespectful to me. So there's something about that. You've got to do it. You've got to do it. And when you have people that come to you and say thanks, or you see the contribution that others have made, now it's helped others, you just got to do it. So that motivates me.
Okay. And what do you think about this podcast? And I know you and I have spoken several times over the past few months. And why did you decide to come on?
Right. Okay. Oh, you're probably a great guy, and the reputation. I think this is important, and like I said before, if you just keep on watching the same mainstream pieces that there are, even though you know better, you look at yourself as represented by that, and actually it's not true. It's depressing, and we've got to do better than that. And I think the work that you're doing in highlighting successes or interrogating people that are put or dare to put themselves in the forefront of addressing issues like this, they have a responsibility as well to talk about it. So that's what made me come. I think, you know, you've got to give some contra evidence to what we hear and what we see time and time again. And I think the more of those things that we can support is frankly the better. Okay. So well done to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. We have a tradition on this podcast of giving our guests the opportunity to dedicate the episodes that they feature on, you know, to anyone or any group of people of their choice. So who would you like to dedicate this podcast to? And you're more than welcome to look into the camera for that.
Right. So I'm going to get myself in trouble on this one because you told me to. you told me just one person, and I'm going to do this for my mother. Yeah, my mother was an incredible force of nature. I think she was pivotal to my thinking around equality and freedom and fairness and justice. She was very much up north we say, you know, a virtue is, you know, say what you mean and mean what you say. say what you mean and mean what you say. That's how and she was very much like that. And you know, she died just over 2 years ago. And you know, mother, you made me proud, and I think you were typical of many women of that Windrush generation that cared for the village, cared for your offspring, and I love you, and many more mothers like you of that ilk as part of our community are up and down the country, and they've made a difference.
Thank you. And it just so happens that tomorrow's Mother's Day as well, isn't it?
There you go. It's Mother's Day as well. So, you know, she died two weeks ago, and then she was buried around this, you know, so she died, and she would be burial, birthday, and Mother's Day all around the same time. So I'm thinking of Mama.
Yeah, fantastic.
So if anybody says they weren't mentioned, you know, you can't go against my mother.
Well, David, once again, thank you very much. I know you're a very busy person, and so it's taken a bit of scheduling to make this happen, but you've made it happen. I mean, you've shown your commitment and support to this, and for that we're grateful.
Yeah, I'll say to you as well, Daniel. You know that this podcast is becoming more well known in a lot of quarters that I'm involved in, and you keep doing this. It's a really, really important piece. So it's an honour to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, if you've watched to this point, if you've enjoyed it, I'd like you to, first of all, like this video, share and subscribe as we help to build a platform so that the bigger the platform gets, you know, the easier it will be to keep bringing you guests like David, you know. And like I said, it's important to have these conversations because that's the way that we can keep the conversation going and not just wait for seminal moments, but keep it going. So thank you very much for watching and see you next week. Done.